If genes cause disease, then identical genes should cause identical health outcomes, but they don't. Oh, but it's more complicated than that. If it's more complicated than that, then genes still don't cause disease. If environmental factors are required for genes to cause disease, then simply put, the gene is not the variable that causes the effect of disease. Disease is not what we've been told, nor are genes. Now, there are many questions that will be begged throughout this video, like the question of whether or not DNA exists as a natural entity. This is something that I've covered, and I will cover more moving forward. We're doing a huge deep dive on this in the academy, doing roundtables at the moment, going over all the fundamental papers, point by point, to completely dismantle this most problematic narrative. Genes have become a scapegoat of the modern world, not just the broken allopathic systems, but the alternative ones as well. Functional doctors, naturopaths, all adopt the scam of genetics as a cause of disease. We use genes as the cause when we fail to acknowledge, identify, and resolve the true root causes. Right now, there can be physical and metaphysical factors here, but generally the root causes are toxicity and deficiency. Toxicity includes, of course, anything that is synthetic in any quantity. It is foreign, the body does not recognize it. Now, anything that is natural, out of balance, is also a toxicity. Deficiency can be lack of whole food, not lack of isolated nutrients like vitamins. Those have never been demonstrated to exist in nature either. If you understand that argument, you understand the genetic argument very well. We completely adulterate and confound the isolation of DNA and vitamins. And so there's no true foundation based on the elements of empiricism and the scientific method to determine that these exist in nature. Since we have to adulterate the sample, they only exist as laboratory artifacts considering the empirical scientific method. Regardless, you don't need to go that far to understand the scam of genetic disease. Disease is a process, not a blueprint error. Chronic diseases and even diseases that are associated with genetics are all extremely new phenomenon. I mean, we have the anthropological evidence for this. We see this is most certainly not because testing has improved. Often we find empirical errors in testing as well. Like you can test someone for a breast cancer gene, yet they'll never develop breast cancer, right? It's the same for truly any gene or even biomarker, right? There's no connection or correlation whatsoever between these proxies and the outcomes. Generally, genetic studies identify associations, right? Certainly not mechanisms. The mechanisms, funny enough, are extremely debatable. And listen, I'm quite familiar with all of genetics because I studied this in university. Like I took molecular biology and biochemistry, which was not as largely centered around metabolism as you might think. It was, most of my classes were genetics. So I know in depth about PCR, I know about proteomics, I know about, the methods used to sequence Illumina. Like we did all this stuff in lab. I understand exactly how the samples are contaminated. I've seen it first time. And, you don't need to go to school to understand this. Like you can quite easily understand this just by going and reading the literature. The methods are long and they adulterate the sample. And funny enough, a lot of the labs end up being on the computer because that's where most of genetics takes place, in silico, right? When we use computer generated sequences and based off probability, there's truly no foundation because no one's ever seen the genetic sequence. We just use a bunch of indirect methodologies and then pump them all together in a circular fashion and say, hey, listen, we got the answers. And then we move into the applied sciences, which hold no validity in reality, and think that we're gods because we have numbers on papers and theories that make sense to us. And it's just a bunch of mental masturbation because when we identify these genes in the computers based on these tests using PCR, which is an extremely problematic method, risk genes, quote unquote, still do not identify reality, inevitability. Environment is always required. And so contradictory observations, of course, are the presence of the gene without the phenotypic outcome or trait, right? So it's like a baldness gene or a height gene, you can't find it, right? Even a cystic fibrosis gene, PKU, dwarfism, they can't find, even for so-called Mendelian disorders, they cannot find a gene, right? So they write a convoluted story that, it's a bunch of genes and epigenetics that requires, interfacing with the environment. And again, that completely confounds the whole genetic inevitability, genetic determinism argument because the environment is necessary. Without the environment, you don't have the outcomes, right? So twin studies show this as well. Two people with identical genes, one develops baldness, one develops obesity, one is shorter than the other one. One has different chronic illnesses than the other one, yet they have identical genes. There's a lot of work on this actually in the mental health field. They try to say mental health is genetic. schizophrenia, psychosis, oh, it runs in the family. Heredity is very interesting because it's observable. I look like my parents, obviously I get traits passed on from them. Is this because I've been passed on some sort of gene that causes a disease or a habit or trait? Or is it because I grow up in similar environments? People often do not break these patterns. Schizophrenia, for example, is so interesting. And people have talked about this for 100 years. Theodore Lids, Thomas Saz, and now you have great people like Robert Whitaker, Jerry Marzinski, Andrew Kaufman, who discuss schizophrenia as being, again, completely an environmental issue. And in the great book, How to Become a Schizophrenic, one of the components of the recipe for schizophrenia is being treated like a schizophrenic person. This is often because there was a relative that was psychotic. And so they think, oh, this person is different. This child is different. They must be psychotic. That is a very common theme in schizophrenia. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, we don't understand how powerful our minds, our habits, the narratives and stories that we're told truly are, right? It's like trying to say poverty is genetic, and I'm sure people out there try to say this, because you can make the connection that it seems like it's passed down through heredity. I do not disagree with this objective observation about it seemingly being passed down, but the mechanism of it being genetic is absolute nonsense, and this stands on absolutely no foundation, because the whole field of genetics is circular and has no foundation whatsoever in using the scientific method, right? We have to confound the samples to get results, and we never account for these confounding variables. Another interesting part is the growing list of mutations and genes that supposedly cause illness, right? Because when you have someone who shows, symptoms of MTHFR, methylation deficiency, we can't find that mutation, that single nucleotide polymorphism, the gene. And so you add a new one, right? When you can't find what you're looking for, you just add a new gene. You say, oh, well, I found this, so this must be another gene or mutation that causes the disease, right? And it's like we're just constantly adding, and there's no validation. It's like compared to what? The Human Genome Project? Well, the Human Genome Project actually didn't take DNA from just one person. They say, oh, largely it was from one person. And still there are inherent weaknesses in the entire Human Genome Project that geneticists disagree with. The whole Human Genome Project is something we're covering in the Academy in the next couple months here. And it's been discussed, with Cowan and Yernea Tomzik, but it's certainly not what it seems. Like, we're told a story about genetics, and it's totally disconnected from the science. And that's why we're going over every single foundational paper in genetics in the Academy, right? Like, we're looking at Meichner, we're looking at Chagraf, we're looking at Hope Sellier, we're looking at Watson and Crick, we're looking at the Human Genome Project. Because when you look at the papers, when you look at the objective work that's done, you realize, okay, we're completely adulterating these samples. Hydrolysing it actually alters the type of nucleotide present, which changes the percentages, which changes the material, which changes. It's like, okay, the methods themselves are creating and altering the results. So again, at what point do we have a foundation? At what point do we have here's the genome? Because we don't have a picture, because Watson and Crick and Rosalind Franklin, their 62-hour x-rayed picture shows nothing, and there were actually some students that did the same process with a ballpoint pen and got the exact same picture, right? So the picture is not unique. Oh, but now we have electron microscopy pictures. It's like, do we really? When you look at them and you study, we talked about this with Yernea Tomzik, of course, in our podcast together. She's a PhD molecular biologist who knows that the entire field of genetics is absolute nonsense. But the preparation, once again, of the electron microscopy image is still confounded because the variables are not controlled for. It's like, how do we know that this DNA strand actually exists in nature when we can only ever get it so deep into a test tube after the addition of tons and tons of chemicals and isolation procedures and centrifugation and heat, all of which is said to destroy DNA, right? It's like, oh, X-ray, I got an X-ray picture of the DNA. It's like, hold on, doesn't X-ray cause DNA damage according to their own claims? These things are contradictory, right? We don't realize how we're confounding these experiments. And this is one of the biggest problems in science, right? And scientists, of course, they can't see it because the ego, the funding, the vested interests get in the way. Losing tenure is losing your status in academia, and their heads, of course, are bigger than their objectivity. To get back to the main premise of this video, all of these assumptions are discussed more elsewhere, most notably in the academy. If you're looking for a higher level understanding, original papers, there's lots more stuff going on in the academy, so make sure you go check that out. But at the end of the day, there's absolutely no proof or even a connection between certain genes and certain health outcomes. I do not disagree that people suffer from symptoms that we call, methylation symptoms or PKU, and there's certainly dwarves out there. No one's denying the existence of dwarves, but it's whether or not this is caused by genes. Did you know that 82% of dwarfism is de novo? That it's random dwarves being born. It's not dwarves coming from dwarves, and there's not like generations of dwarves sitting around. It's like, no, these are de novo things that happen. And we call it Mendelian because most often dwarves come from dwarves, but this has also been falsified, right? And so the question is it genetic or is it environmental? The train obviously proposes that it's more environmental for reasons that are in other videos. But for now, I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, leave them down below. I do love to chat about this stuff. That's why I'm opening up roundtables in the academy so we can all come together and discuss this at a higher level to answer a lot of these questions. Most often we have questions regarding health outcomes, and the answer lies in the symptoms and nosology course. It's like, get back to what you're experiencing, right? Nosology is a problematic field based in so much assumption. We must get back to what's real. What are you experiencing? Rather than tests and numbers and genes supposedly on a piece of paper, let's get back to what's real. That's what Beyond Terrain is all about. That's what the academy is all about. So I appreciate you all for taking the time. Make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Help support the channel grow. But I appreciate you all. Thanks for listening. Take care.